Hello and welcome to this very special bonus episode of the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike and as ever I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. Usually on this podcast we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. We are currently in the middle of our fifth series which explores the evolution of the occult in horror cinema. However, this week we're taking a little break from regular service because this week saw the release of the brand new Blumhouse Leigh Whannell horror film, The Invisible Man. Now we've got loads of really interesting stuff to get through this week and loads of incredible guests. I sat down and chatted to the producer of the film, Jason Blum, the director, Leigh Whannell, and the star, the man who played The Invisible Man himself, Oliver Jackson Cohen. Not only that, I'm going to be joined by Rosie Fletcher to discuss the movie. And as with all new releases covered on this podcast, the first half of mine and Rosie's discussion will be completely spoiler free. We will not give away any plot details. We will simply give our initial thoughts and reactions on the film, so anyone can listen to that section of the discussion. Then, after a big fat spoiler warning, we will then get into the nitty gritty and we will discuss the movie in depth. Absolutely loads to get through this week, and I'm going to kick things off with my interview with Jason Blum. Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm sure most of you do, Jason Blum is a kind of horror producer extraordinaire. In fact, I would argue that he's probably one of the most important people in the horror genre working today. He is the founder of Blumhouse. Now, Blumhouse, as a movie studio, rocketed to fame with Paranormal Activity back in 2007. And Paranormal Activity really kind of sums up what Blumhouse do. It really kind of introduced the Blumhouse model. The Blumhouse model essentially means that Jason Blum will hire directors and writers and make their movies if they can stick to a $5 million budget. So a relatively small budget for Hollywood. And if the writers and directors stick to that budget, they get complete creative freedom and final cut. So it's thanks to this model that we've had a whole bunch of low budget but really interesting and original horror movies and horror franchises. Blumhouse has brought us, as well as Paranormal Activity, it's also brought us the Purge franchise, the Insidious franchise, the Sinister franchise, Happy Death Day 2U. It's also brought us some really interesting reboots like Halloween. They've got an upcoming reboot of The Craft later this year. And perhaps most importantly, it's thanks to Blumhouse that we've had Jordan Peele and movies like Us and, of course, Get Out. Even outside of the horror genre, Blumhouse are responsible for brilliant Oscar-winning movies like one of my personal favourite movies of all time, Whiplash, and also Spike Lee's Oscar-winning Black Klansman. So again, I think you can see why I was so excited to sit down and chat to Jason Blum about his relationship with the horror genre, the Blumhouse model, and The Invisible Man. Now, just to reiterate once again, this interview is in no way spoilerific. We do not give away any plot details of The Invisible Man. So here is my chat with the brilliant Jason Blum. Hello, Jason.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
How's London been for you so far?
London's been a little grey, but that's what it's supposed to be this time of year, and everyone looks like they need a little sun, including me.
Absolutely. So what can you tell us about The Invisible Man?
The Invisible Man is made by one of our premier filmmakers, Leigh Whannell. You know, we've known each other for 10 years. This is our 7th movie together.
Incredible.
He's one of the best I've ever worked with at making scary, fun movies. And what you should know and people should know about The Invisible Man is it's super scary, super thrilling, but also really, really fun.
Amazing. You are, I hope you don't mind me saying, a kind of stamp of approval for me on any film as a horror fan.
Mind you saying, I appreciate it.
I always think, and I think it's quite unusual in this day and age for a studio to have a reputation in terms of sort of creatively, I suppose. And
well, thank you.
I just wondered, you know, how much input creatively do you have, if any, on these films?
We have an enormous amount of input on the you know, half our business is TV and half is movies.
Yeah.
About 80% of the TV company is actually non-horror but darkly themed stuff. 20% is horror. Movies is the reverse. 80% horror, 20% other. We have on both sides, but the movie side in particular, a ton of creative input because the result, our model is we do low cost movies, and in exchange for keeping the budgets low, the directors get final cut. cut. They get to do what they want to do. They have total creative control over their movies. But the result of giving the directors total creative control is they elicit our opinions forever because they know they don't have to do what we say. So the result is that we have very fruitful creative conversations all the way through development of the script. Terry Taylor, who runs our casting, casts all of our movies, which is very unusual for a studio. Usually the studios work with individual casting directors. And through the production, through post-production, marketing, distribution, we're super involved, but we don't mandate our opinion. We offer it, and we let the director choose what he or she wants to do.
Excellent. And by the sounds of it, you and Leigh must have a pretty good working relationship.
Yeah, we have a great working relationship. We really, I really admire him, and I find the way his mind works very inspirational. It's one of the best parts about my job is to get to see people like Leigh at work.
So with The Invisible Man, did you ever have in mind that, okay, this could be, as a producer, is this the beginning of a new run of Universal monster sort of reboots?
I really hope so. Yeah. But I don't have any design. I have no plans to do any other monsters, but I would like to. And I would only go to Universal and ask if I had a filmmaker and an idea, which is what we did with Invisible Man. Leigh had a very specific idea, and I don't know what's going on with the other ones. I don't know what's available, what's not available, and I'm not going to ask unless I have another partner who has a great take on one of these ideas, and then maybe we'll get to make another one.
Okay, cool. So you kind of have to approach Universal about getting the rights to the character.
100%. Yeah, they're totally in control of these characters.
I see. Exactly. And just so there's no confusion for maybe anyone that's listening, this has nothing to do, right, with for example, Universal The Mummy with Tom Cruise that came out a few years ago, right?
Nothing to do with that, except it's a Universal monster. The Mummy's a monster, Invisible Man. Yeah, but nothing to do with that. And there's an Invisible Woman, I think, that they're developing, but that may or may not get made. This has nothing to do with that either.
Right, gotcha. Okay. How much has the way that you've made films and the way that you've worked in terms of your budget restrictions, etc., how much has that kind of changed and evolved since the days of Paranormal Activity?
It's in a way it's evolved a lot, and in a way it's evolved not at all. The financial model is very similar to what it was. The budgets are they're not $1 million anymore. They're $7 million, but they're still, compared to the average cost of a studio movie is $75 million. So we're still working in whatever you want to call it, micro budget or low budget. Yeah. The kind of movies that we choose are different. I think, I don't know if, 5 years ago, The Invisible Man, Get Out, Halloween, I don't know if we would have done those movies, or the kind of movies we're looking for different types of movies now, because the bar is much higher to get people to the theater. To get people to a horror movie in droves to the movie theater, the movie has to be an event. It has to feel like an event. Us felt like an event. Halloween felt like an event. Get Out feels like an event. The Hunt, which is an upcoming movie, I think will feel like an event. And I think The Invisible Man feels like an event.
That's very cool. I've got to ask you a bit about Get Out. I mean, it feels like so unusual, really, for a horror film, a genre film, to win Oscars, to receive that much of critical acclaim as well as commercial success. How much, if anything, did that sort of change for you and for Blumhouse?
It changed a lot because the kind of people who were more open to doing a horror movie after Get Out was recognized at the Academy Awards was very different. So we've had a very different, not necessarily better or worse, but a breed of directors walking into our door saying, hey, I want to try a horror movie. Now, I don't think to make a great horror movie, you don't have to have made a great horror movie before. I think it's very important to make a great movie. Yeah. But I'd much rather work with a director who's made a couple of great movies that weren't horror movies than a director who made an okay horror movie. Yeah. And so the longer answer to your question is there's a lot more people, actors also, who are willing to step foot into Blumhouse and try making a movie with us.
How do you spot a really, really good horror script from a new writer? What is it that sort of stands out for you?
We look, most of our, and why I would say Invisible Man is like checks all the boxes of a Blumhouse movie. Most of our movies are writer directors. We rarely have a separate writer from a director. It happens, but it's not often. So, and the way we look for our new projects is the most important thing is the body of work of the director. That's the key thing. And then after that, we look for We have 5 or 6 people who we all read a script over the weekend. We have a heated debate about it. Because we're making low budget movies, we can ask the question, does the movie, we have to love it. It has to be scary. But then we can say, does it feel different and does it feel new? And one of the biggest advantages of working in low budget is you can make things that feel different and new. If you're making $200 million movies, they have to feel like 3 movies that have come out in the last 5 years that are like this movie.
Yes.
That's the only way to responsibly greenlight a movie of that size. But one of the many reasons I like working in low budget is because one of the categories one of the criteria we can use to choose movies is that the movies feel new and like nothing we've ever seen before.
Are you ever going to write and direct a horror feature?
Never. I think one of my biggest strengths as a producer is I have no desire. Not only do I have no desire, I couldn't. Like, I would just be terrible at it. I'd be a terrible director. I don't feel the need to like exercise that. I think a lot of producers suffer from wanting to be directors, and the way they get that out as they tell the directors what to do creatively in this kind of brusque way. We don't do that. And one of the reasons we don't do that is I have no desire, would be a terrible, and will never direct movies.
How important is it for you to continue, I guess, keeping a balance of original properties as well as existing monsters like The Invisible Man, like Halloween?
It's important for me, for our company, to continue to produce great, unusual, compelling movies. And I don't make it. We might have a year where we do 6 originals and 2 sequels. We might have the other. Like, I think Halloween it checks every box. Just because it's known IP, it doesn't make it any lesser than Get Out. So I don't really look at it as like, we should do this many originals, this many. We should do as many great movies as we find in a year, and that they could be, and that we might, some year maybe we'll only make 4 instead of 8. But that's what I look at more than trying to define what we're going to do before we choose it.
What is your, personally, as an audience member, what is your favorite type of horror? Do you have a favorite kind of subgenre? Do you like monster movies, slasher movies?
No, my favorite type of horror is probably psychological thriller. And I also love mystery horror. Like I movies like Sinister, which there's a mystery underneath the horror. I love those kind of horror movies too.
What's your favorite horror movie? Do you have a favorite?
Ever of all time. It changes all the time, but I love it. Today it's Rosemary's Baby.
Oh, good choice.
That's a good movie.
Very, very good choice. I want to ask you about a couple of future projects. You're probably not going to be able to tell me much, but what can you tell me about the next 2 Halloween movies? Anything at all? I
just saw the next one, Halloween Kills, the second movie. I saw it a couple of weeks ago. It's amazing. It's super big. The canvas of the movie is big. For us, it's much bigger than our normal canvas. And it's amazing. It's super violent, and I loved it. And the third movie, we're not going to start shooting it for 3 or 4 months.
What about The Craft?
The Craft, we finished shooting. It's been editing for 4 or 5 weeks. I haven't seen it yet. I'm supposed to see it, I think, in about a month. But I have high hopes for the movie, and I'll next time we talk, I'll know more.
That's very exciting. I think a lot of people, that seems to be a movie, the original The Craft, that has kind of grown in popularity over the years.
Yeah, I think so too. It's amazing. There's never been a sequel or a reboot or anything, and it feels like a really ripe time to do it. So like I said, I have super high hopes for the movie.
It certainly does, absolutely. And I saw on IMDb a potential new Paranormal Activity movie.
We are doing a new Paranormal Activity. We have Chris Landon, who was basically he wrote almost all of them. He directed one of them. He's really kind of the showrunner of the Paranormal Activity series, and he's coming up with Paranormal Activity 7, which is not the title of the movie, but it is the 7th Paranormal Activity.
I love, it seems to, when you look at kind of horror trends, they do kind of come in trends and sort of subgenres and styles and that kind of thing. I would say that Paranormal Activity kind of brought back this idea of a kind of old-fashioned ghost story.
Totally.
Probably after people like Leigh Whannell creating something else with Saw a few years earlier, right?
I think Paranormal Activity was a response to Saw in a funny way.
It's really interesting. And do you feel that we're having a moment right now with any particular genre or subgenre?
Well, I think the moment is social thriller horror movies. I think people are really, I mean, The Purge was that, but Get Out really changed that. And I think people are interested in those and are making those. And I think that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. With a few minutes left, I've got a few questions from listeners, if that's all right. So I'm going to try and fire through as many of these as we can.
Okay, terrific.
Okay, this one comes from @Adders and they said, did you ever say no to a film that got picked up and then regret your decision?
Did I ever? I'm sure that I had. The movie that I always say that when people say, what movie did you wish you produced? I always say, I say the movie that I wish I had produced, which was The Conjuring.
Yes.
But it didn't get away. I never had a chance to do it.
Sure.
The Witch.
Ooh.
We passed on The Witch.
Did you?
I really wish we made that. Yeah.
Interesting.
That was a mistake. Yeah. So I'm sure I've got more, but that's the one that comes to mind now. Yeah.
Are A24 your kind of rivals?
No, they're in a very different business than we are. They're in a kind of this elevated horror, and they're the audience that they're reaching is much smaller than our audience.
Yeah.
And they're making a kind of horror movie that we don't particularly make, although I think The Witch kind of probably straddled both what we would do and what they do, or Hereditary, for instance. We never had a shot to make Hereditary. They're making specialized horror movies, and we don't really do that.
Yeah, and like you said, there is that funny word, isn't there? Elevated genre, which
I don't like that word.
It's not a great word.
Other people use it.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
This question from Stephen Mitchell. He says, "Why is it that trailers often spoil so much of movies? Is there anything you can do to change that, or is that what you want?"
No, I have a very bad reputation in that. Our trailers are known for giving away too much of the movies. Fans get mad about that. Look, the truth of the matter is on that, it's extremely difficult. Every day it's harder to get people away from Netflix and into a movie theater. Mm-hmm. And although super fans will come to the theater anyway, a lot of people are on the edge and they don't come unless the trailer shows a lot of the movie. So that's why we do it. And for the super fans, I apologize.
Stephen Volk has asked, are you ever bored by jump scares?
Yes, I think there are a lot of jump scares that are unearned, and I'm bored. Listen, I'm guilty of having produced movies where they're unearned jump scares, but I don't like them, and I try not to do them, and we don't always succeed. But when they're unearned, I am bored by them. Yes.
Can I just say, Invisible Man has got some of the best jump scares. Really,
there's not a single unearned jump scare.
Oh my God!
Who was it who asked that question?
That was from Stephen Volk.
Stephen, I want you to know there's not a single unearned jump scare in Invisible Man.
Stephen Volk actually wrote a really interesting. He's a writer.
Oh,
he writes for the BBC.
Oh, very cool.
And he wrote an incredible thing in the 90s called Ghost Watch. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Never heard of it.
It was a big deal in the UK where it was kind of presented as a television show like a documentary and then turned out to be a fictional thing, but it was kind of a big hoax. And a lot of people complained about it and stuff.
Good for you, Stephen. Good for you.
Yeah, so that was quite cool. This question is from @EDS209, and they've said, what crime would you commit on Purge night?
Oh, I thought it was going to be what crime could I commit if I was invisible. On Purge night, I would get as far away from the United States as is possible. And I would be nowhere around on Purge night. That's where I would be.
Excellent. This is a question from @TheFrightClubNI. And actually a lot of people ask questions in a similar vein to this, which is, how would you go about pitching an idea to Blumhouse or getting an actual script on your table, Jason?
Well, there are about 100 people at the company, so they don't need to get the script on my table to get their stuff. We have a show on I don't know what it is on the UK. In the US, it's on Hulu. You know what it is on the UK? I don't know. It's called Into the Dark, and we've made 24 of 26 movies for holidays, and they look at our TV company. We look at new material all the time from new writers all the time, and if we like it, we make it.
Excellent. This question comes from Harry Steele. He says, I love the concept for the new Invisible Man, and it's such a why didn't I think of this before type angle.
Well, thank you, Harry.
It really is. Are there any other classic monsters or stories that you'd like to give a modern twist to?
I'd love to do Frankenstein. I've tasked our filmmakers with trying to figure out just straight Frankenstein, and again, I don't know if someone else is doing it. I don't know anything about it, but I would love to try, and I'm waiting for the great idea. Invisible Man, I agree. It's the best ideas feel like, my gosh, it's so obvious. Why didn't it happen before? And if we could come up with something as good for Frankenstein, I'd love to try that.
What about Happy Death Day? And a few people have asked, why no Happy Death Day 3?
Well, because you those people didn't come out to see 2, for goodness sake.
I'm sure they did.
I'm sure they did, but not enough of them. Not enough people saw 2. If 2 had done better, we definitely would have made 3. Chris actually has an idea for 3, but I haven't given up. I would never say never to the Happy Death Day franchise, but we have no current plans.
It's such a shame. So was it just simply because it didn't perform as well as
it was only because of that? Yeah. Had it done even close to the amount of business that 1 had done, Happy Death Day to You had done, we would have made a 3rd one. We were planning on making a 3rd one, but for some reason, everyone has a different theory as to why. I personally don't think it had anything to do with the movie. I thought the second movie was terrific, but for whatever reason, people didn't connect or come see the second movie like they did the first.
I guess it comes down to everything is the weather or what time of year it is or what other films are on.
The marketing, when it released, factors out of our control. But when people say, what is some of your bigger disappointments of running the company. One of my bigger disappointments is that we didn't get to make a 3rd Happy Death Day. That Happy Death Day to You was not more of a financial success.
So finally, then, what's next for Blumhouse? What else have you got coming up after The Invisible Man?
We have, right on the heels of The Invisible Man, The Hunt, which I'm really excited about.
What can you tell us about that?
I think I love it. It's a satire. It kind of pokes fun at extremes on both sides of the political spectrum, which I think both those, when you're on the extreme of either side, you merit being poked fun at. And I'm really excited for people to see that movie. I think it's going to create a cultural stir. We have this summer The Purge, our next Purge movie, which is also going to be very controversial and fun, I think.
Excellent.
And
there's never been a better time for Purge.
Never been a better time for Purge, exactly. Then we have our second Halloween movie in October, and then I have an idea for a movie that we finished that I think will slot into November, but we haven't announced it yet. So we have a busy time on the movie side of the company. On the TV side of the company, we have this great series we did with Showtime called Good Lord Bird, which Ethan Hawke stars in, and he plays John Brown right before the beginning of the Civil War, and it's terrific, and that'll air in 2020 as well.
So exciting. Can't wait. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Amazing.
And there we go, Jason Blum. That's another one I can tick off my bucket list, having him on the podcast. What an absolute treat. So later on in this episode, I'll play you my chat with director Leigh Whannell and the Invisible Man himself, Oliver Jackson Cohen. But first, let's discuss our initial thoughts on The Invisible Man, completely spoiler-free. So joining me to discuss all things Invisible Man, one of my regular co-hosts on the podcast. A pleasure to have her here again. Welcome back, Rosie Fletcher. Hello. Hello. So thank you so much for being here, first of all.
It's my
pleasure. We're going to get into The Invisible Man in a minute, and I'll ask you your brief thoughts, kind of spoiler-free, first of all. But we've just heard me talking to Jason Blum, and I just wanted to ask you, I know you also interviewed Jason Blum, didn't you, for this movie?
Yes, I did.
Let me ask you, are you a fan of Blum and Blumhouse and all of their work?
Do you know what? I'm a super fan of Jason Blum, I think. So depending on where you look at the starting point, it's basically 20 years of Blumhouse pictures, and like I'm a massive fan, and I really think that they've kind of changed the face of horror. You know what Jason Blum's model is, right? So he has like 5 tenets.
Yes.
And it's basically so it was under 5 million, but it's now like 7 million because right. Inflation.
Yeah.
And it was original.
Yep.
Has to be scary. No eyes on a sequel. So yes, there can be sequels, but don't make a movie with an eye to a sequel. And the other one that this is sort of based on an interview that I did with him some years ago.
Yeah.
Was no first time directors unless you've got a producer that is a very well established producer on board.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, for example, because I mean, Blumhouse is amazing for horror, of course, and like, you know, you've got Paranormal Activity, and you've got like, you know, Insidious and Purge and Sinister, but also Whiplash.
Yeah.
And Whiplash, of course, was a first-time director. I mean, I know he'd made Whiplash as a short, Damien Chazelle, but like that's because it had a sort of named producer on board.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the sorts of the tenets. But like, what I love about Blumhouse is that they're incredibly agile.
Yeah.
So Jason Blum talks about himself as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I would completely agree. So he absolutely understands that it is a moving, changing beast.
Yes.
And yeah, I've got to say, like, I'm a huge fan. I'm not a fan of every single movie they put out.
No, and actually, I think what I really loved about Jason Blum when I met him as well, which I'm sure you found, is that he's quite humble and quite honest. And I think he will quite happily talk about his failures, maybe, and the films that didn't maybe hit the beats that he wanted them to hit.
100%. And also, like, he does press.
Yeah.
Like, in a way that I don't know any other producer who does as much press as Jason Blum. But also the media wants to talk to him because he's so bloody fascinating.
Exactly.
And he genuinely is. And yes, he does talk about his failures, and also like he talks about the way he works, like, as I said, as an entrepreneur, like almost as a startup, so that if you make something that's brilliant, then you'll make more money than you've ever seen in your life.
Yes.
And if you don't, then you won't.
Yeah, exactly.
But in a way, that's kind of empowering. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a filmmaker, I'm a journalist, so like I can't talk about it from those perspectives. But I mean, for me, watching these films, it's like, well, wow, you get to do something really interesting and different, and you know, this is what The Invisible Man did.
Exactly. And it's, you know, it feels like in my lifetime, this is the only time where there's been a kind of a horror a studio, I suppose, that is as, like, the fact that Jason Blum as a producer is as famous as Leigh Whannell or Elizabeth Moss when it comes to this film, right? He's as much of a name, and it's not often when you go to a press interview you'd be as excited about interviewing the producer as you would be the star or the director.
You're completely right, and it's also it's sort of almost like looking back to Hammer.
Yeah, exactly.
Where Hammer was a thing.
Exactly.
Or like Roger Corman.
Yes.
But now, like, I completely agree with you. And I was, certainly as excited about interviewing Jason Blum again. Yeah. And I have done many times, and every time it's gold.
Oh. Like, has he changed much? Like, as he's gotten bigger and bigger and more of a big deal?
No, he's like, he's puppyish, and
he's very excitable, right?
but fascinating, and knows what he can and can't talk about, but never bats back a question. He'll always answer, but sometimes the answer will be, I can't talk about that. But like, honestly, I have a little bit of a crush, but like don't we all? Well, we all should, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, I asked him, he wouldn't tell me anything about it, but obviously we've got the Craft reboot coming up this year. How do you, because I know you're a big fan of the 90s Craft, how do you feel about the upcoming Craft reboot?
Do you know what, though? Right, so my gut response would be, what the hell? No. But because it's Blumhouse, it's like, all right, you know,
let's see what you've got.
All right, because I really like the Halloween reboot. I love the original Halloween. I wasn't like Halloween franchise person, but the original Halloween is a masterpiece, really. And I really like the Halloween reboot. So while I didn't really want a Craft reboot, I sort of trust him.
Yeah, I agree.
I do, and it's a female director, Zoe Lister-Jones, and that's interesting to me.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, it's not 100% hit rate with Blumhouse, but actually they are kind of, for me, like they're like a mark of approval or something, like a mark of quality, you know. Cool. Well, let's get into it then. Let's talk about Leigh Whannell and Jason Blum's Invisible Man.
As the attorney representing Adrian's trust, I'm required to read a prepared statement. Cecilia, although our relationship was far from perfect, I thought that you would talk to me rather than run away.
Are you okay? What happened to him?
He cut his wrist. Per his final wishes, you're getting $5 million. Contingent, of course, on the fine print. He can't be ruled to be mentally incompetent.
the hook for Invisible Man is that this is a take on, and of course the Invisible Man is a universal monster.
That's right.
It was created, by H.G. Wells in like 18 something, rather 97. Anyway, 18 something.
Yeah.
But this take, the very sort of the initial hook is that the movie isn't about the Invisible Man; it's about his victim. So, what this is a story that is about a woman who is the victim of domestic violence, basically. So, like, her husband is abusive, and she, in the early scenes, manages to escape in an absolutely brilliant, I will say, early scene where she has to very, very quietly try and leave this prison-like complex. And you get a sense from that who her husband is and how awful he is. And it's really told from the victim's perspective. So basically, she manages to escape this complex. This is the first time you really see her husband. And he's not a character, but he is a character through her eyes, and we understand as a viewer that he's abusive and he's awful, and that he's controlled her, and he's controlled what she wears and what she says and what she thinks and where she goes, and she does manage to escape. Yeah. In this early, very good, very tense, very good opening scene. And then 2 weeks later, we find her, and she's now living with friends and has her own support group, but is basically suffering from PTSD, and he, we are led to believe, has taken his own life. But she doesn't feel safe. And it's not even a metaphor. It's a very clear kind of parallel to women who've suffered from domestic abuse, and that fear. And so she can't really leave the house. But then this entity enters her life who she believes is it's basically the Invisible Man. That's not a spoiler.
It's not a spoiler to say, is it?
Yeah, he's not dead.
And like you say, it's the kind of old, gaslighting story as well, isn't it? That then she believes the boyfriend is still alive, is harassing her. No one believes her because he's invisible. So
essentially, one of the things that works so well about the film is it's the horror of not being believed. Oh. So it's a very current story.
Yes.
It's about a woman who absolutely knows and is convinced that something is happening to her, but nobody believes her. And her support group is, without spoilers, being sort of somewhat gaslit as well, and or being knocked off in various ways. And so she's isolated. Yeah. And so it's a very tense story. It's a very relevant story, and it's a very current story. But it's also really scary because, of course, it is a horror movie. It isn't like super political. It's not an elevated horror. It's a B movie. Totally. In the best possible way.
Totally. I 100% agree with you. So you are a fan, I take it. Did you enjoy it?
I really did. I thought it was much better than I could possibly have expected. I thought it was very frightening at points. There's several extraordinary set pieces. I think that Leigh Whannell has really found his feet as a director, and it feels it feels like a companion piece to Upgrade. So if people who liked Upgrade,
that's interesting.
I would say if you like Upgrade, then you should see this, and I think it's better than Upgrade. I liked it enormously. Yeah,
he is. I think it's probably sometimes somewhat easy to dismiss Leigh Whannell, the guy that made Saw and Insidious, as being maybe just like jump scary or whatever it might be. But like, there's what I loved about this film is there's so much control. It feels like it isn't full of jump scares, is it? Like, to the point where actually sometimes it's almost unbearable. Where I almost wanted a jump scare because he really takes his time for such a big portion of the film.
Yeah. So one of the great things about the movie, and one of the great things about the approach he's taken, is because the focus is on the victim and not the Invisible Man.
Yes.
We don't know when he's in the room.
Yeah.
And so therefore he's always in the room.
Exactly.
So we feel like any room ever he is in. And so we're always
on edge.
Yeah, and shoulders hunched. Yeah. Fur bristling like a cat. Yeah. At what point and what and how and I don't know. And so the scares aren't jump scares, they're shock scares.
That's interesting, yeah.
Because something comes out of nowhere and the audience cannot guess. Yeah. So, and it doesn't use... So actually, I thought the film use music very well and silence very well. I mean, the opening scene is all about silence, but it does use music and silence very well. But it isn't. And again, I'm not denigrating any of these movies, but the Conjuring universe, for example, uses like piano to go scare. But this doesn't. It uses nothing. And then something you could never have predicted because you don't know when he's in the room and he's not, happens out of nowhere.
Exactly. It's so clever. So you've got this invisible man who is basically, obviously, we never know whether he's there or not there throughout. And then you've got Elizabeth Moss, who I think is on screen for the entire time, apart from maybe 2 scenes. I think Leigh Whannell said that she's not in. Other than that, she's basically never off camera. How do you think Elizabeth Moss does in this film?
Oh, I think she's terrific. And actually, she carries it. Yeah. So, like... this is a difficult role, and like you said, she's on screen all the time. She is playing someone, and you know what, I think it's really important that they cast someone as good as her, because like if this had been cast with someone who was like, you know, histrionics or I don't know, like massively over the top, it would be making a mockery of what people, like real people, actually deal with. So it doesn't do. I mean, I really liked the film, and I think because it's Elizabeth Moss, she carries it really well, and she's believable, and you're with her, and you care about her, and you understand that she's being gaslit by the invisible man, but there are hundreds of women who are being gaslit by real, totally visible men. And if she had been super campy and super kind of OTT, it wouldn't have worked, and it might have felt a bit offensive. But it doesn't at all. Like, you're with her, you believe her, and actually it almost, like, the film's quite long. It's almost 2 hours. In fact, it's over 2 hours, isn't it? And I don't criticize it for that, because it's structured well. But there are points where it's like, I can't really bear this anymore. I need her to be believed. Because this is hurting me now. And luckily, I do think the film's very good. And at the point where I felt like I can't really deal with any more of her not being believed, then we have that wonderful corridor scene. But I don't want to go into spoilers at this point. But
that's it. I think it does what the best horror does, which is like it teeters you to the edge of what you can take.
I just about,
and it never goes beyond it, does it? Which is
exactly.
It's so good. It's such a good point. And she is like phenomenal. And you're right, like she plays it so well. And she is obviously a B-movie story, but she is playing it like she's in a deadly serious movie. She's playing it like she's in The Handmaid's Tale or whatever, right? So it's like full on, like as earnest as you can get with it, which
like
is
you feel for
good.
her.
Yeah, exactly. You properly feel for her, and all of the other kind of minor characters around, like supporting characters around her, are really good as well, aren't they?
Yeah, agreed.
He just builds a nice little world.
Yeah, and it's logical.
Yes.
Again, without spoilers, but there are things that happen and you think, that is what you would do. Even though it's like to Elizabeth Moss's character's detriment, you're like, I can understand why that would be that way.
Exactly.
And it's this spiraling. It's almost slightly Hitchcockian.
I think so. Yeah, definitely. Especially with the way the suspense builds throughout. Does the film scare you then? Did it scare you when you watched it in your screening? Yeah, it did.
Well, so like, there were lots of points where it was very tense, and I felt very uncomfortable. And there were a couple of scenes. Oh well, there's one particular scene, and I know that you know what I'm talking about, where I went,
yeah, me too. I gasped out loud.
I just because it's like, because you couldn't possibly have seen it coming.
No,
it's very shocking, and
and also, which we'll get to. I don't want to. I've tiptoed around it, but also there's an emotional gut punch to that moment too, as well. It wasn't just a meaningless scare, was it?
No,
that's the thing.
There's a resonance to it. Very much. Yeah.
So as we mentioned, it is over 2 hours, just a little bit over 2 hours. I think. Is that too long?
Well, in general, I'd say yes.
Yeah.
But I don't. But I wouldn't. There's not bits of this I would cut. Yeah,
I know. It's really hard to know, isn't it? Because I think it had a few endings for me a little bit. Like every time I thought we were at the end, we weren't. But having said that, the next ending, I liked even more. So I don't know whether it was a problem for me or not. Maybe we'll get into that more with spoilers. But
it didn't feel it didn't feel long.
Yeah.
Like sometimes, you watch a movie and it feels long.
Yeah.
And I can't say that for this. It is long, but it didn't feel long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. All right, well, I think there's not much else we should say in this spoiler-free section other than, I suppose my main question for you then, Rosie, is would you recommend this film to people? Should horror fans and non-horror fans go and see this?
Oh, yeah, I would highly recommend it. I mean, like what I'd say is it is very definitely horror.
Yeah, it is.
Like it's got sci-fi elements, but it leans into the horror. It's scary. It is a bit of a B movie, so it's not Midsummer and it's not Hereditary and it's not The Lighthouse. Like, don't expect that. But like, it does feel like a really good old school in some ways.
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
Cinematic experience. I would say go and see it at the cinema.
Yeah, old school. And like actually B movie, it reminds me a little bit of, like 90s films like Sleeping with the Enemy and stuff like that.
Yes,
it's a bit like that, isn't it?
It is like that, yeah.
Which are kind of trashy but
good.
Yeah.
And it has a point, but like because its point is so clearly worn on its sleeve,
yes,
it doesn't have to have metaphor.
Exactly.
Because it's just like, it's not a metaphor for this, it's just this.
Yeah.
And so it can then go, okay, yeah, it's a story about domestic abuse, but we don't have to make it metaphorically a story about domestic abuse. It's just a story about domestic abuse.
Exactly.
And so now we're just going to lean into the horror and basically shit you up.
Yeah.
And like, I appreciate it for that.
Yeah, me too. And it's and actually, as much as I love all of the A24 stuff, sometimes it's amazing to sit in a cinema and just be really scared and be on that kind of roller coaster ride that this film takes you on. Yeah, it's wonderful. I love it. Obviously the year is still very, very young, but I would say this is my favourite horror film of 2020 so far. It's certainly the movie that scared me the most so far this year, and I love that. There's nothing I love more than sitting and really shitting my pants in the cinema. So yeah, I 100% agree with you. It's a hard recommend. Leigh Whannell, I think, just really knows what he's doing. He is a director with such a good eye. When you look at everything he's done, from Saw to Insidious to Upgrade to this, he's done some amazing stuff, and actually quite different styles. Torture porn to ghost stories to sci-fi. So before we get into our spoiler section, we're going to play you a little bit of my chat with director Leigh Whannell. And again, just to reiterate, this interview is in no way spoilerific. We don't give away any plot details of The Invisible Man, so anybody can listen. Enjoy. Hello, Leigh.
How are you?
I am so good. First of all, congratulations on The Invisible Man.
Thank you.
I consider myself quite a jaded horror fan, but it scared the shit out of me.
Oh, wow.
Film.
Okay, good. I that's music to my ears because I only finished the film about 2 weeks ago.
Right, wow.
You're talking to me very close to the nerves center of making the film. Usually when you finish a movie, there's a period of a few months where you take a break. You kind of grapple with this movie you made, and then you start the publicity campaign.
Yeah.
This is the first film I've made where tools down, we're finished, and straight into an interview. So it feels...
God.
You're talking to me without any perspective on it yet.
Yeah.
Like, you would have a better perspective on what I did than I would.
Yeah, sure. So have you kind of watched it with an audience yet or anything like that?
I have parts of it. I have real trouble watching my films with an audience.
Yeah.
For a few reasons. One is it's nerve-wracking. Two is, if I'm being honest, I don't like the way modern audiences watch movies.
Ah, sure. Yeah.
There's a lot of movement, a lot of shifting. It's hard. I'm so close to it. I take every toilet break that an audience member takes. I take that as a personal insult. Like, I'm sitting there going, "Oh, what? It's not suspenseful enough for you to piss your pants and sit there and watch it." Like, it's hard to deal with.
I can totally imagine that, overthinking every little reaction.
I do remember being at a test screening, and right at this crucial moment, literally the character was like, "And here's the answer to the mystery you've been waiting for." He gets up to go to the loo, and I couldn't help it. Before I knew what was happening, the words just came out of my mouth. I was like, "What are you doing? You're missing the best part."
Yeah.
And he was like, "Sorry." And I was like, and it's too much. It's too much. I can't deal with it.
Oh, God. Well, you'd have enjoyed the screening I was in because you couldn't hear a pin drop and nobody moved for the entire 2 hours.
Great.
What were the challenges in creating a film like this, in creating tension in... As we know, I'm sure it's no spoiler to say that the kind of antagonist is somebody that's not there, right? So a lot of the time you're filming just kind of empty spaces in this film.
Yeah.
That must have been quite interesting to
it's
do.
Certainly. What's interesting about it is that when you're on set and you're shooting an empty corridor, it sounds like this. Okay, rolling, mark it, and action.
Shh, we can't. Keep it down. No laughing.
Just dead air. And then everybody's looking at you like, when do we cut? And finally I'm like, and cut. Kind of nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Because the crew's thinking, you're going to put something interesting in front of the camera, or are we just going to shoot empty corridors all day? And I had this feeling that an audience who just bought a ticket to see a film called The Invisible Man would instantly be suspicious of any empty space.
Right, yes, that's true. That's true.
You know, they've got this pre-built-in knowledge that that empty space is threatening. So I was trying to weaponize that against them.
Yeah. I guess pacing must be really important with something like this, because you're right. Instantly, you're going to think, "Oh, someone's there."
Right, exactly. I was just trying to be suggestive all the time.
How much or little did you kind of revisit the original Invisible Man or any other kind of iteration of the Invisible Man?
I read the original novel and I watched the original film. It was an interesting experience watching the original film because it's groundbreaking for its time, and I could see where it was groundbreaking. I could see, and obviously James Whale is a very iconic horror director of some great movies. So I had this. It was almost like I was looking at a really great piece of art that was sitting in a museum, and I loved it. I appreciated it, but I also knew it was from a different time and a different era, and I knew that you couldn't slavishly adapt that for a modern audience.
Sure. Yeah.
If you want to really scare them, I think you had to. A modern audience has seen so many horror films and they're so desensitized to thrillers and suspense that to do something different, you really need to shake the story up. So it was a thrill. It wasn't. I never felt scared like, oh God, Invisible Man fans are going to come out of the woodwork and nail me to a cross. I felt a freedom. I felt a freedom in messing with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it's not, compared to some of the other Universal monsters like Frankenstein or Dracula, it's not quite as iconic and universally recognizable potentially, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't think the cultural footprint of the Invisible Man is as big as someone like Dracula or Frankenstein. And it allows you that freedom. It allows you to, when you have those tier 2 guys, and it's what you do with it. Like, if we're to compare it to a very common topic these days is superhero movies. But I remember seeing, people talk a lot about Marvel movies these days and how ubiquitous they are and how they're swamping the multiplexes. But my favorite is that first one, Iron Man, before they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And, Invisible Man is the Iron Man of these monster world. Like, this was not a rock star character. This wasn't Spider-Man.
Yeah.
This wasn't the Hulk. This was a character people weren't as familiar with. So I remember hearing a lot in reading about that movie at that time that there was a safety there. There was an excitement in trying to take one of these lesser-known characters and make something out of it. And I felt that on this. I had this feeling that I didn't have cultural baggage strapped to my ankles.
Yeah.
Like, shake weights,
Yeah.
Dragging me down to the bottom of the lake. If you make a Dracula film, you've got all those great Dracula performances and all those movies, staring over your shoulder. And I just didn't feel that.
No.
I didn't. It's not that I don't love the character and feel that he's an important character. I do. It's just that I don't think I'm as surrounded by cultural baggage.
And that original Invisible Man, he runs around, he causes havoc, he chases people in his pajamas, he steals bicycles.
Steals the bike.
Steals hats. It's safe to say I think this is a different kind of Invisible Man. What kind of updates did you kind of give to this character for a 2020 audience?
I felt that the movie should be about his victim. I wanted to tell the story through the eyes. Look, to fear him, to fear something in a movie, you have to see that threat through the eyes of the person who's scared.
Yeah.
If you were to make the Invisible Man the central character of this movie, I'm not sure I don't know about other filmmakers, but speaking for myself, I'm not sure that I could make that scary. I'm not sure what I would do. Mm-hmm. I mean, it might be disturbing, in a way, but disturbing wasn't what I was going for. I was going for something that was like just filled with terror, something that made you feel like this person was out your window, this person was in the room with you.
Yeah.
You know? So immediately that makes the main character, someone else, you know?
And you're dealing with the Invisible Man, obviously, who is not present really for most of the time filming it, and then you've got Elizabeth Moss, who is pretty much on screen what feels like the entire time, right?
There's 2 scenes in the whole movie that she's not in. There was only 2 days on set without her, and it felt weird. I remember on those days I'd be like, something's wrong. Something's off. What's wrong? What's wrong?
She did an incredible job. I mean, what was it like kind of directing and working with her through that process?
It was great. I mean, the thing with a lot of times with actors, you get into the edit room and there's like 5 takes, and say you're looking at 5 or 6, maybe 7 or 8, you know, and you're thinking you're looking for the good take, you know, what's the best take? With Elizabeth, they're all good. The problem with her becomes which one do we choose? She actually makes it's almost more torturous, because if you have an actor who has 1 good take out of 5s, then it's
fairly easy choice.
Yeah, the decision's made for you. With Elizabeth, it's like, oh, what do we do? I mean, 2's so good, but 4 is great too. And the editor, Andy Canny, and I, we agonized many nights about what performance to carve, because you actually could have cut a different movie. She gives you so many options across the takes that I could have cut a different movie. That's how many options she gave me. And the movie you saw is just the one we chose.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. What's your favourite part of the process? You know, writing, directing? Do you like getting into the edit afterwards?
Sound mixing.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that's so important, right? As well,
sound mixing is. I mean, funnily enough, I went to a film school that concentrated on sound.
Right.
It's one of the only film schools in the world that places a high priority on film sound over visuals. So many schools talk about cinematography, and directors are taught that visuals are king. This was a strange outlier in the world of film schools.
Yeah.
Because we were always examining sound in film, and we would study movies like Heat and these movies, The Conversation. We would study these films that had really intricate soundtracks.
Yeah.
And, usually movies about sound have interesting sound designs, like The Conversation, a Blowout.
Yeah.
You know, these movies, whenever the movie's about sound, you're almost legally obligated to have a great sound design. And it's something I'm really glad that I went to that film school, because it's given me this appreciation of something that is underappreciated to this day. Yeah. I don't have many conversations with anybody about sound in film.
Yeah.
People will ask about visuals all the time. But the sound department are truly the unsung heroes. And so that's something we really worked hard on in this film, is the sound. You are very, very good, always have been, at jump scares. What is the key to creating a really good jump scares? Because there are a lot of bad, cheap jump scares out there too, right? Well, I don't know what the key is. I don't know what makes a good one, because I can't bottle it. But I do know what makes a bad one. I feel like a bad jump scare is cheapened. A lot of times it's not threatening. You know, it's the best friend knocking on the window. Yeah. A lot of times, the orchestra or the music is telling the audience when to be scared. A lot of times I see movies, I won't name any names, obviously, but I see a lot of movies that just relentlessly do this. They just keep... A jump scare, it's this new term that's entered the sort of modern pop culture lexicon, and partly due to these Blumhouse movies. Absolutely, yeah. Insidious, often considered to have one of the biggest jump scares, right? Is that the demon crouching behind Barbara Hershey? You always see it at the top of those lists. At the top of the list. Right? Oh, it's a great one. I mean... James and I were so excited when we created that, and I thought he directed the hell out of it. Like, it just looked perfect. But like anything in movies, whether it's a laugh or whatever it is, it needs to be timed perfectly. You need to have earned it. When you haven't earned it, it's like in comedy they say a cheap laugh, a cheap gag, a groan-inducing gag. When you've earned it, like, just off the top of my head, one of the great comedic lines is, I'll have what she's having. Yes. You have this huge build-up with Meg Ryan, and then this perfect little cherry on top of the sundae comes in, and it's just timed so beautifully. And that's, to me, what these so-called jump scares are about. It's about taking people up to the edge of the line, teasing them. They fill with tension. And just when their muscles are clenched so tight from tension, you can release it, hitting them in the face. But it just has to be done classily. You have to earn it.
Yeah, it's that build-up, isn't it? I think it's the timing. Yeah.
Too many films, they don't build on anything. They think the jump scare or the soundtrack sting is enough in and of itself.
Yeah.
They're like, well, this will do the job, and it's not true. It actually has diminishing returns. The more you do it in a movie, the audience starts to feel safe. It's like, well, this isn't. You gotta know when to hold them and fold them. And with this movie, I was like, I only want to do 3 big adrenaline hits in the movie.
Yes.
Most of the time, I just want to be teasing the audience,
Also, speaking of, one of those moments is in the trailer. Does it bother you how much is in that trailer?
I mean, look, it's a hard thing to calibrate because I want people to see the movie. I want them to be intrigued.
Yeah.
And I also know what's not in the trailer.
Yeah.
So when people say, oh, gosh, she showed me the whole movie, I know that I didn't.
Yeah, you don't know that. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, you don't really know. You feel like you saw the whole movie, but you really didn't.
Yeah.
There is a part of me, when you see a scene like the scare scene, there is a part of me that dies inside because I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
But the marketing people swear up and down that we need to get people in the theater by telling them that this is going to be one scary movie.
Sure.
And you're caught in this world of wanting people to experience the movie in a movie theater. Awareness is what gets people into a movie theater, and it's getting harder and harder, as you know, to get people off the couch.
Yeah.
Netflix and Apple TV, they're so great that why would you go and pay all this money to sit in a dirty theater? And, what was once amazing when I was a kid is now kind of janky,
Absolutely.
In fact, a lot of people's televisions in their homes have better color and picture than your average movie theater screen.
Yeah.
Some of these theater chains, they don't change out the bulbs in their projectors.
Yeah.
You'll sit in there, you'll notice that one of the speakers is out and you're not getting the full... I mean, it's the maintenance on these theaters is not always good.
Yeah.
So for good reason, it's getting harder to get people into the theater. And so when a marketing person says to me, we want to tell people what they're in store for, it's hard to argue with.
How do you feel about Netflix and, creating movies for Netflix and that kind of thing? Obviously Mike Flanagan has done so many great horror movies that went straight to Netflix. How does that bother you, the idea of people just seeing your films for the first time on a small screen and not in a theater?
No, it doesn't bother me. And I enjoy Netflix as a viewer. I'm at home and I watch The Irishman at home like everyone else. And if I hear something is a big event on Netflix, something's coming up that's really going to be great, I'm excited about it. But as a filmmaker, not a viewer, but a filmmaker, I prefer movie theaters. I mix a film for a movie theater. You want the film to be seen at its best.
Yeah.
Like you don't sound design a movie for an iPad.
Yeah.
And I don't mind people watching a movie on an iPad, but that person has to know that they're not getting the full experience the way it was intended.
Sure.
It's fine, but if they want the full experience, they've got to be in that theater.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's what it was mixed for. We're utilizing on this movie Dolby Atmos, which I don't know if I'm mentioning brand names here, but it's this amazing speaker system where you can throw sound all over the theater.
Yeah.
And we actually mixed the film to take full advantage of Dolby Atmos. And I know that people like Chris Nolan, he's a big advocate for theatrical exhibition, but also the type of theatrical exhibition. He doesn't just want you to go to a movie theater. He wants you to go to a 70mm IMAX theater. He wants you to see the film the way it was shot and intended to be seen.
Yeah.
And he's really successful, at least in terms of me. I will slavishly follow his orders.
Absolutely.
I don't want to see any of his movies outside of an IMAX theater, and not just any IMAX theater. It needs to be the proper... I really am devoted to that stuff. And so I want people, if I'm being picky, I'd rather people see it in a Dolby Atmos equipped theater.
Yeah.
Now, not everyone's going to do that research, but I know there's a few film fans out there who will find out which theaters have that system and see it. Now, of course, I'm not Chris Nolan, so I can't get that sort of devotion. He has a large following of people who will do what he says, but I'm hoping that people will seek out the absolute best way to see this film, which I believe is, Dolby Atmos, IMAX.
I'm sure they will. You have almost pioneered subgenres in some ways when you look at Saw and kind of what that launched, and you've dabbled in that kind of the gore stuff. Then obviously Insidious was something almost entirely different. I just wondered, you as a horror fan, what is your favorite kind of subgenre of horror? What's your favorite area of horror?
Oof. It changes. I do love sci-fi horror, like The Thing, Alien, Aliens, Predator, you could even say, is almost...
And actually Upgrade was a lovely sci-fi horror. Would you call it a horror? I don't know.
Yeah, it was almost like body horror.
Yeah.
I love Cronenberg.
Yeah.
I think sci-fi and horror are two genres that go well together.
Yeah.
There's something great about that cocktail. I do love a really good haunted house movie, and I'm including The Shining on that list.
Absolutely.
Like The Shining ostensibly is a haunted house movie. And when it's done right, and it's not done right often, but when it is done right, it's a really satisfying genre because it's small scale, it's human scale. We're not dealing with demons being unleashed from hell. We're not dealing with a zombie apocalypse. We're dealing with, it's usually one family in a domestic setting. It's very familial and it's intrusive because when you turn off the movie, you realize you're in the house, just like the one in the movie.
Yes,
now you have to go to bed and close your eyes in your bedroom, and
it stays
that
with you.
horror next door element of it really stays. Yeah, exactly. So that might be... Haunted house might be my favourite subgenre.
Nice. Do you mind the idea that you partly pioneered the subgenre, if you even call it that, of torture porn, right? Because that is so what Saw is now associated with.
I mean, I think that is a kind of a, tawdry term. I don't like the term, but I don't have a problem with it existing because... all I ever wanted to do my whole life was make movies.
Yeah.
I've loved movies since I was a kid. And there's this voice in your head, especially as I got older when I went to film school, there's this voice in your head that keeps saying, you're not going to make it. Statistically, the chances of making it in the film industry is very low.
Yeah.
A lot of people want to be doing this, and you're not special. Steven Spielberg, David Fincher, Sofia Coppola, these people are special.
Yeah.
You're not special. And that voice for someone like me, I'm not bursting with confidence and self-belief. It was a strong voice. And so when I look back on Saw, not only did we get our film made, but we actually impacted the culture to the point where a term was created in the wake of it.
It's a big deal, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like how many... If that had to be my epitaph, I'd be, I'll be the guy slumped over the bar, like, I made a movie once. And the bartender will be like, yeah, sure, Leigh. I'm like, I did. It was famous. It was called Saw. And the bartender would say, I think I saw that movie. I'm affectionate about that time because the only reason I'm sitting here talking to you is because of that.
Yeah.
The fact that we inadvertently created the millennial Freddy Krueger without intending to, it's kind of cool. I mean, do I love the sequels that they made to Saw? No, not all of them. I feel like... But, I'm not involved anymore. It's not up to me.
So you've got no involvement in the upcoming Spiral? No.
I do want to hang out and go drinking with Chris Rock. So
Yeah.
I'd like to monetize this. As the creator of Saw, I feel he owes me that drink.
I think you can play that card.
Yeah, I can play. I'm going to play that card when the time comes.
Yeah.
Believe me. But I'm affectionate about what it did for James Wan and I. I'm affectionate that it kickstarted this life I wanted.
Absolutely.
So it would be very hard for me to be angry or bitter about some aspect of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that would just be so wrong-headed, I feel.
Totally. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much for joining me, Leigh. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
A big thank you there to the wonderful Leigh Whannell. What a great guy. I could have sat and chatted to him for a lot longer, if only. Okay, before we get into our spoilerific discussion, here is my chat with the star of the movie. He plays the Invisible Man himself. Oliver Jackson Cohen has also started to carve out a little niche for himself in the horror genre because he also starred in The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix last year. He played Luke, the older version of Luke, and he put in a tremendous performance in that show. Not only that, he's also going to be starring in the new Haunting of Hill House. That's called The Haunting of Bly Manor, which is coming to Netflix later this year. Very exciting. So I sat down with Oliver. We chatted about The Invisible Man and about The Haunting of Hill House and about Bly Manor and about all things horror. Here we go. I'm very excited to introduce Oliver Jackson Cohen to the podcast. Hello, Oliver.
Hello.
So the first thing I want to ask you, which I'm sure you've probably already been asked quite a lot today, is how much were you actually present on set? How much?
A disgusting amount. Like, yeah, like it's actually quite. It's kind of crazy because people seem to think. You know, I remember when I first was offered it, and they said, and I thought in my head, I was like, oh, that'll be like 2 weeks. Yeah. It wasn't. I was there for like 2 months.
Oh,
it was
really?
kind of crazy.
Okay.
Well, Lizzie and I went through the script, and we discussed, you know, what points it would be important for me to be there, because even though you don't see him, you know, there is something there. Mm-hmm. And so I was there quite a lot.
Nice. Okay.
Quite a lot, yeah.
Interesting. What did you make of the character, and how is it as an actor playing a character that is, let's be honest, as monstrous as this guy is?
He's pretty horrific.
Do you have to find anything, any nugget of an element of his character to sympathise with or relate to?
Definitely. I think that's one of the hardest things. You know, as an actor, you kind of can't put a judgment on who you're playing.
Yeah.
And Leigh and I spoke about it a lot in sort of early stages about. I had no desire to play him as the villain. And I think specifically, without giving too much away, when you meet him in the movie properly, we didn't want a kind of moustache twirling moment. And so an awful lot of it was Lizzie and I and Leigh in a rehearsal room going through and talking about the dynamics of what the reality of these relationships are like and how we could take this monster and make him a human being. And it's I wouldn't say it's necessarily a comfortable experience playing someone like that, but it feels important, you know, with the story that we're telling. So you do need to find a way in, and with someone like Adrian, it was hard, but these people are damaged people. I personally feel Adrian doesn't deserve any sympathy for his behavior. But you have to, in a way, find a way in, and I think he is incredibly damaged, and so that's the kind of way into it.
How familiar were you with the original property of The Invisible Man? Did you go back and revisit the film, or did you kind of stay away from it?
I didn't revisit any of it for this. I mean, because I think it's such a departure what we're doing, you know, from any kind of iteration that have come before. So I didn't feel that it was necessary, and I felt that my time was better spent sort of researching domestic abuse and these kind of relationships and what narcissistic behavior is like, and so spent an awful lot of time doing that. I mean, I was familiar with, you know, the original. I mean, the original I watched all the time when I was a kid. It's and it's still phenomenal how they managed to do that stuff. I mean, you think it was the 30s, and they managed to pull that off. It's incredible.
You have done now a couple of really scary horror projects in the last couple of years. I just wondered, what is your own relationship with the horror genre? Have you always been a fan of watching horror films?
I really have. I mean, when I was a kid, I was quite, and this was probably, you know, it could very easily turn into a therapy session, but I was a very scared kid, and so I used horror as a way to kind of test just how far I could push myself. And I think horror over the years has evolved an awful lot, and there was a period of time where horror turned really, really silly. And that's happened a couple of times. But I think what's happened in the past couple of years is that brilliant filmmakers like Leigh like Mike Flanagan, like all of these kind of what's his name?
Ari Aster, yeah.
I mean, it's incredible what the stories that are being told through the veil of horror, and it's incredible. You know, fundamentally, our movie's about domestic abuse.
Yeah.
But it's a horror film, and it really deals with domestic abuse in a very real way without exploiting it in any way. Mm-hmm. And yet it's still a horror film. And so it's a very, very interesting medium in order to be able to tell these really quite hard-hitting stories in a way that makes it palatable to an audience. And so as an actor, it's not necessarily that I've ever had the desire to work in horror. Yeah. It's just that these characters, I did this show last year called The Haunting of Hill House, and the character in that was by far the most interesting character I'd read. And to be able to play, so I don't think it's necessarily to do with the genre. I think that people are waking up to how powerful, when it's done well, how powerful it can be.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It's interesting, like you said. You know, it's probably had its ups and downs, horror in mainstream cinema at least. But we have been going through a real moment of it this last maybe 10 years, and maybe it's to do with Blumhouse. Who knows? But
it's definitely. I think Blumhouse have played a really, really big part in that, and I think that what Jason, and all the team do there is phenomenal. And also the fact, just if you look just from a business model of how they construct these films and how they shoot, the scripts are locked before you start filming. So there is no, we'll go into production and we'll figure it out and we'll rewrite the script and we've hired this person, so isn't that great? They are so regimented in how they shoot these movies that it forces people, they do them on smaller budgets. It forces people to be creative. It forces people to think outside the box, and it forces people to not be lazy. And so I think what him and that company have done is really quite revolutionary for what they've done.
It is amazing, and actually, it feels quite unusual these days for a producer to be as much of a name in a way as the director or stars or whatever. And I wondered how much involvement has Jason Blum had? When you were on set, for example, was Jason Blum very present, or is he?
He came down to. I mean, we shot in Australia, so it's not around the corner for him. But he came down to Australia. He does it. He's involved in every single product. He goes and does a set visit on every single Blumhouse production, and he's very, very heavily involved. And the team at Blumhouse, we had this incredible exec producer called Bea Sakaria, who is the kind of eyes in it. I mean, every single person that works at that company are a really, really intelligent, very, very good at their job, and so you feel in very good hands, in very safe hands when you're working with them.
Amazing. I've got to ask you a bit about The Haunting of Hill House, because you were absolutely incredible in it.
Oh, thank you, mate.
It is probably one of my favourite TV shows I've ever watched, really.
Oh, wow.
I absolutely loved it. And I just wondered, what were kind of some of your memories of making that? And were you aware when filming it that it was going to become as big and as talked about as it was?
No. I really don't think any of us did. And I think it was quite a shock when it came out. I remember us when we it was a very long shoot. It was like an 8 or 9 month shoot, and we'd finished it in the summer, and then it came out in the sort of fall of that year. And I remember just sort of thinking, well, we shot this thing and it's about sort of family trauma, it's about sort of childhood trauma, but it's a horror show, but it's actually about grief, but it's about ghosts, and people would look at me like I was crazy, and I was like, I don't fucking know if it's going to work. And so I don't know. I thought originally going into it, I thought this is such an interesting thing what Mike's doing.
It's quite ambitious, wasn't it?
It really was, and it was unlike anything that had been done before. Especially in TV shows, And so I don't think any of us really knew how it was going to be received. And I don't think any of us not expected, but I think it was quite overwhelming, the response that it had and how it seemed to tap into people's psyches. And still to this, I mean, I was saying in an interview this morning, we just wrapped the second season on Sunday, and I flew back in last night, and at the airport on Sunday night, I went to the toilet, and someone spent 15 minutes talking to me about, like, I was at
just
the
what you need
urinal.
after
Yeah,
after
exactly.
Yeah.
I was at like the urinal, and they were like, "That, excuse me." But it's incredible how people need to talk about their own experiences and what has happened to them in their lives. And I think that was what was quite overwhelming, was being part of a show that seemed to really affect people in a way.
It meant a lot to people.
Yeah, and and I think that there's, without it sounding wanky, like there's something so lovely about that as an actor, to be a part of something that is creating a discussion and that isn't just sort of entertainment fodder that people go like, "Oh, that was scary, next." And I think similarly with Invisible Man, that it's creating a discussion. The movie it leaves you wanting to discuss the movie. So it's exciting to be a part of both those projects.
Is there anything you can tell me about Bly Manor?
No, I'll get in so much trouble. I will as well.
We had a couple of guests on the podcast that have directed episodes this year. So really? Liam Gavin and Axel Carolyn.
No way.
And so what was that like in comparison to, because the first series, right, was almost entirely Mike Flanagan.
Yeah, he directed the whole thing.
So this must have been a bit of a different experience.
It really was. It was, Mike and the whole Victoria Pedretti, who played my twin on the first season, we're both back in sort of a big way in this one, and it was strange because we'd had this experience all together doing this show that we just kind of didn't, we were in Atlanta and we didn't really know if anyone was, and then it came out and was this massive thing, and then here we are again. But we're all playing different characters, and we're in an entirely different city, and it's an entirely different story, and it's the same creatives, but Mike's not directing it. And so it was kind of, it's been quite the experience. But I think what Mike has done with the second season is the right thing to do. He's not trying to recreate season one in any way. He's pushing it forward in a different way, and I think it's right. And we did have different directors come in and direct, and we had different writers on it, and so he wasn't as present as he was on the first season, but is very much present in the edit. So ultimately, it will be a Mike Flanagan special.
Amazing! I cannot wait to see it. Oliver, thank you so much for joining me.
No worries.
And there we have it, the wonderful Oliver Jackson Cohen. What a lovely man he was. Okay, now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty. This is your big, fat spoiler warning. If you haven't yet seen The Invisible Man, maybe stop the podcast now and come back, because everything that me and Rosie talk about from this point onwards is going to be spoilerific. You have been warned.
I'm scared.
You don't have to be scared of him anymore.
He was a sociopath, completely in control of everything. He said that wherever I went, he would find me, walk right up to me, and I wouldn't be able to see him.
Are you okay?
Someone's sitting in that chair. I found something that can prove what I'm experiencing. You need help. Adrian is dead. I went to his house today. He's not dead.
I have a pile of ashes in the box that would disagree with you.
He has figured out a way to be invisible.
The only thing more brilliant than inventing something that makes you invisible is coming up with the perfect way to torture you, even in death.
Okay, I think I've got to start at the beginning here and talk about the opening scene with you, because that opening 5 minutes was, I think, masterful and was probably one of the best opening 5 minutes of a horror film I've seen in a long time.
Really good, and also really clever. So I actually massively want to big up the opening, because it sets up... So it's really clever and it's really tense and it really works cinematically, but it sets him up as a monster without him being in it.
Yes, it's so clever.
He is basically asleep, or mostly asleep, and yet you know how terrible he is because of her, and that's again tribute to Elizabeth Moss. But it's because of her reaction and because the way she has to get out of the house with the bare feet and the rucksack and the dog and all these things, you know that he is awful without him even being in it, which is so clever. For a film called The Invisible Man, where the Invisible Man is basically invisible.
Yeah.
You get that he is a monster, and I think that's a real tribute to Leigh Whannell as a filmmaker and as a screenwriter. I think that was really clever.
It was phenomenal, and it just went on and on again to the point where I almost couldn't take it. This opening scene, there's no music, there's no jump scares, and it's slow, and everything is kind of methodical, and you're stuck in real time as this woman has to get out. It's so good, and like I was literally like, that was it. On the edge of my seat from about 30 seconds in through to like the 2 hour mark. Yeah, so good. And then the other moment, actually, let me also ask you a bit about the scene that I think everyone is going to be talking about. We alluded to it earlier, the scene in the restaurant. One of the most shocking scenes, I think, in the film, where the sister has her throat slit. That is a powerful moment, right?
I know.
And like, I think it's really interesting, like what you said, the way you described it as like a shock scare and not a jump scare, because there's nothing about it that is jumpy in the sort of traditional sense, is there? There's no big music moment or anything. It's just, it happens in a very matter-of-fact way, and that in itself is so shocking.
It's so shocking, and it's so effective because so obviously for listeners who have seen it, like, this is the moment where Cecilia is telling her sister, like, and she's saying, you won't believe me, but this is what's happening, you need to trust me. And she and her sister have fallen out because of some emails and blah blah blah. So she's trying to reach out for help. And like, if we're looking at this in not metaphorical but in an actual sense, like, she's like, I need to be honest. And then of course, and like, you can't possibly know, but then suddenly this knife appears out of nowhere and slits her sister's throat, covers her in blood, and everybody thinks she's done it. And like, there's literally no getting out of that.
No, what can you? That's
because it looks like, and then of course it's in her hand, so it looks like she's done it. It's incredibly shocking, but it's also very emotionally shocking. Because it's like, well, she's doing, one of the things I really liked about the movie is that she makes Cecilia, which is Elizabeth Moss' character, makes sensible choices. Doesn't make stupid choices.
I agree.
And like, it really annoys me in horror movies where people make choices that are like, well, why the fuck would you do that? But she doesn't really do that. And she does tell her sister, which is what you would do. And it's in public.
She makes sure they go to a public place. That's the thing. Everything makes sense, doesn't it, in the film?
And I would never have guessed that was going to happen.
No. And then I think that's the thing, is that it's that absolute disbelief. It's the way that Elizabeth Moss's character reacts, and then it's also the way that everyone else reacts. And again, I think it could be so easy in a genre film, in less capable hands, of having that throat slash happen, everyone immediately scream, or something happen immediately. But again, Leigh Whannell really takes his time with the pacing with this, and everyone reacts in the restaurant how you would imagine people to really react in something like this. There's this kind of few seconds of realization, her throat is slit, and then everyone kind of looks round and no one quite knows what's happening, and then more and more people start to look, and then the gasps, and then the screams. And it's like, again, you know, to reiterate, it's not a jump moment, it's a slow, matter-of-fact reveal of like, this has just happened, now we're dealing with it.
And of course she's been marched out by police, and then it's like, well, but what the fuck now?
What the fuck? Yeah, that's it. And that's when it goes into that really horrible. And
it's dark, though.
I hate films like this, like, you know, where somebody is not believed and they end up being locked in a cell and straitjacketed, and it's awful.
No,
it's such an awful trope.
And it's a trope. You're right.
It is.
But and I don't
for
like
a reason. It's powerful and it's scary. And
it is, and it is a trope. But like in this case, it's done so well.
It is done
well. And because it's like the first time she's really told anyone that she now knows she can't tell anyone else. Because we didn't know who was in the room.
No.
This is the thing. There was no indication that the Invisible Man was in that room.
And that was what was so clever, because actually that's one of the few moments probably I almost forgot that he might be there.
No, me too.
You know, like you said, that for most of the film you're thinking he's probably in the room. That one time where they're in a public busy restaurant, I wasn't even thinking about it, you know, and it's like, that's what's so clever about it.
I completely agree. And so you're like, she's done everything right. She's in public place. There's waiter and blah blah blah. He, you know, I didn't even think that he was going to be there, and then suddenly her sister, and like, how can that even be possible? But of course it can be possible.
And it's mean spirited as well, killing off the sister as well. It's like, it's really,
So
it's
cruel,
a nasty, cruel moment.
Yeah.
But it's so good.
It's so good, yeah.
She's super smart. He is also really smart. That's what makes him really scary. And it's like a battle of wits, isn't it? Throughout the whole film,
Yes, it
in
is,
a way.
yeah.
It's like, who's gonna outsmart the other one? All the things that she tries to do when she has to go back to the house and go into the sort of wardrobe bit, and her.
But he already guesses it. Like, yes, you're completely right. Like,
It's
yes,
like,
and I love that about it. They're
when she gets into the cab and all of these different things she tries to do. You know, it's really
both really clever. Yeah,
and that is what makes him such a terrifying. And she says it a lot, doesn't she? That like she says, "Oh, this is what he does. He thinks about it and he calculates, and he'll be controlling this and manipulating that kind of thing."
Yeah, and that really taps into the idea of like coercive and abusive relationships.
Yeah,
where you kind of know each other really well and you know how to hurt each other and you know how each other thinks, and like particularly, I mean, obviously he's set up, I mean, again, I know I've mentioned this before, but like he's such a great monster.
He is,
for someone who isn't in it.
It's
he's
amazing.
Not really in it.
It's so clever. It's so clever
that he's like this super intelligent guy and all the surveillance stuff that's going on. But that she is also clever and can kind of manipulate that slightly, but like she has to be thinking one step ahead of him. It's like it's quite, I mean, I'm saying it's not an elevated horror, but it is quite elevated in the sense that like it's not like a slasher film. I mean, it has slasher elements to it.
Yeah,
it does, because he's like an unseen monster, and but it is very much about outthinking each other.
It is, and I love that. And like you said, that we get that straight away in the opening scene with her working out how she can escape,
and she's planned it
turning
clearly,
the camera around so it doesn't face her and everything. It's so good, and I love the way that, like you said, he's not there. You see him in the background of a shot when he's in bed, or you see him through a CCTV camera asleep. And even the moment when he almost catches up with her in the car, you kind of just see his arm and not really his face, and it's like he is completely invisible, even when he's not literally invisible in this film.
But he's ever present, which is a great, like, it's a great way to talk about that thing of like, you know, of PTSD and of like you move away from your abusive partner, but they're ever present. They're still there. You feel it.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, we see that in the early scenes where she can't leave the house.
Yes.
And she is safe.
Yeah.
At that point, but she can't. You know, she manages to go to the letterbox, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, like it is a cleverer film than it looks like.
It really is. I love that about it. And like you said, you know, the way that he then kind of chooses to strip away her support system bit by bit. So obviously kills the sister, but then there are other more kind of slightly subtler but more insidious things that he does, like when he punches the daughter of the guy that she's staying with, and because he's this like rock throughout. You think thank fuck for him throughout the whole film.
And he's like police guy and like really strong and a cool person.
Yeah.
But yet his daughter is of course his heart. Yeah. And so it's like, well, you hurt my daughter.
Yeah, that's it.
Like, that's it, yeah.
Yeah. And it's, again, totally believable, like everything that guy does and everything they all go through together. What do you think of the brother then of the Invisible Man? And what happens with that brother character kind of throughout?
Yeah, I have to say that may be the slight weak point for me, because I couldn't, I don't know, I couldn't completely get on board with that character as a character. Like, who is he?
Exactly.
And what does he want? Because he says he hates his brother, and then later we find out that he's kind of in,
it's weird,
in collaboration.
He's in like 4 scenes maybe, and in every scene he's different, and he's got a different motivation. So you first meet him and he's kind of being a bit of a dick about not wanting to give her money and stuff.
I mean, I guess, are we supposed to understand that he's being puppet mastered?
I guess, right?
But
and then,
it did feel a bit like, well, why? And you could have not done that, and actually you're the person who knew, and why would you do that? And if you hate him so much, like, you could have gone to police. Yeah. If you hate him so much and your life is, and obviously he ends up getting killed. Yes. Like, that didn't feel, that didn't quite work for me,
no, exactly. Because then the next time we see him, he's kind of being slightly more sympathetic, and he's like, I know what you're going through. My brother was a monster and stuff.
Right,
and
but is that real?
Is that I guess that was a lie.
And then he's dressed in...
Because then he comes to visit her in prison, and he's like, we'll get you out if you have the baby and move in.
Which, by the way, doesn't work.
No.
At all.
In what way?
That is such nonsense, that kind of narrative. Yeah. Like, it's like, I've I have impregnated you, and
Right,
it's just not believable within people's psychology. If he's super smart and she clearly wants to leave, there's no world where he'd believe that she would go, yeah, go on, then I'll have your baby, and everything will be fine. And I find that narrative quite irritating in general. I think it's as offensive to men as it is to women. I don't think that just no. Just don't do that, because I don't think a man would want that, and I don't think a woman would want that, and I think it's just I kind of wish they hadn't done that. When you talked about there being one ending too many,
yes,
and it being too long, I could have done without that.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Because
interesting.
I know why that had to be there to get to the point where we actually ended, which I quite liked. But that whole, he will take you back. It's seriously?
Yeah.
He's supposed to be
so
really
smart.
clever.
Yeah.
In what world?
Because you think if he thought, and maybe he never believed that she would stay with him, but maybe he didn't care. Maybe he just wanted to literally confine her until she had their baby and then kill her. Who knows? But
maybe.
Who knows? Yeah, I know what you mean.
But also, why would he ever think she would agree to that?
No, exactly. It's true. And the way that the brother then kind of becomes part of that, kind of coercing her into doing that, is strange.
He's a very odd character, and I didn't quite because early on when it's you can have all this money, but not if you do a crime.
Exactly. Yeah.
That was quite clever.
Yes.
And of course she doesn't commit a crime, but
they make it look like she does.
Yeah, and I thought, that works, and I like. That's smart, and that's that to me is in the mind of the monster, he's set this up and taken it from her, because he's torturing her essentially.
Totally, exactly.
And I really like that. But then when it's you have to have my baby, that's no.
Yeah, exactly. I think that what they were going for with the little brother was that he was this bullied, victimized kid who's also become this kind of different type of dangerous, toxic guy, right? Because he's slightly. Because she says, doesn't she? She's you're kind of I can't remember the word she says something you're kind of a weedier, wimpier version of him, essentially. It's that same.
I mean, there is something
nastiness.
A bit gross about him, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. But he's less of overtly a kind of brute, maybe, than the brother. Although also the actual Invisible Man himself is really interesting, isn't he? Because when we see him, played by Oliver Jackson Cohen at the end of the film, again, we never actually see him do anything violent like that actor, do we? Which is what's so clever.
Yes, exactly. And Oliver Jackson Cohen is very handsome, and very charismatic. He's got a very
friendly face.
Yes, exactly. He's very charismatic, and that really works.
It works so well.
So it's you could see why she would fall in love with him. Yeah. You could see why he's and he's very charming. Yeah. But I think that probably that strain didn't quite work.
Yeah,
for me, because I mean it's a very clever film. Bookending it with. The Invisible Man, Adrian he's called, he's there at the beginning and he's basically asleep. He's there at the end and he's very charming, and all through the middle he's invisible, but we know, and when we see him on screen he's charming and handsome. But when we don't, he's an absolute freaking torturous monster, and that's so clever.
It's so clever. It's he's one of those monsters, a little bit like a little bit reminded me of the husband guy in Rosemary's Baby, that kind of very nasty, but on the face
very
of
alpha
it,
though.
And also thinks of himself as a bit charming, and almost thinks of himself as a good person, doesn't actually believe that he's a monster.
Which works so well for that story.
It is, exactly. It's horrible, and again, it's just the little moments, when he was just that moment when they're having a steak they're eating at the end is so good, and there's so much tension there because again he's being so nice and normal, but then he'll say those little things he says the word surprise, doesn't he? Which we know he's already said when he was invisible and stuff, and it's so clever. Let me ask you a bit about some of those endings then, because what I thought we were at the end of the film, basically at the moment when she is about to slit her wrists in the shower, and then that corridor moment happens when all of the different security guards and policemen keep coming out and they all keep getting killed one by one, and then we've got that chase scene kind of in the car park and everything. I was kind of oh, this is it. You mentioned it briefly earlier, but how did that sort of whole sequence play out for you? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, very much. So the corridor sequence was so cathartic.
It was,
in a weird way.
It was
so I think that again is Leigh Whannell, his last movie was Upgrade.
Yes.
And Upgrade is a tech paranoia thing.
Yeah.
And it's about a guy who has sort of an implant that means he's sort of not in control of his own body.
Yeah.
And Upgrade's really good.
Yeah.
And it's got loads of really amazing action scenes.
Again, kind of like a really good B movie, right?
Yes, really good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this feels like a companion piece to it, because even though it's not the same, so like in the corridor scene, it's not that they aren't in control of their own bodies, but they kind of aren't, because they're fighting with something that's not there.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking just in terms of like action and acting, like these are people who are having to enact being shot, stabbed, punched, kicked, whatever, by nothing.
Yeah.
And it's completely convincing.
Yeah,
like,
you're so right. Yeah.
There was no point that I was, my disbelief was absolutely suspended.
Yes.
Like I was totally like, yeah, he's totally there. I completely believe it. Like Elizabeth Moss does some good action in it.
Yeah.
And like that whole sequence is balletic.
It is balletic.
It's really good.
And it's like, finally, like you said, it's like there's this moment at that point as well where you think,
oh yeah,
now nobody cannot believe her. Like, that there's people that have seen it, there's cameras in that corridor. It's like, thank God.
Yes, completely. It's a super relief. Yes, I completely agree with you. It's like, thank God. and in my head I was like, I hope not everyone dies, because I'm going to be so cross if everybody dies and nobody's seen it. But that's not what happens.
And what of course is really interesting about it, going back to the brother, the one thing I liked, and maybe the brother was almost retroactively fitted in so that they could have this twist, was that character in the corridor isn't the Invisible Man, right? It's the brother, because he's the one who then goes to the home and attacks the father and the daughter. She chases him out of the car park of the hospital. I think so. I guess maybe we don't know for certain.
All right, so I don't know.
In some ways, the one thing I did think about that moment in the corridor was I was surprised that this character of Adrian was showing his hand and being as blatant and in some ways stupid as this, when we've seen him be so much smarter. And it kind of then made sense that it actually turns out to be this slightly bumbling, idiotic younger brother that's doing his bidding for him.
Do you know what? I hadn't even thought of that, but yes, you're probably right. Yeah. Actually, now you say that, yes, of course. Because he has to have been tied up in the closet in that house, which must be miles away, hours away, by the way they make it.
And
it is hours away, because you can see her in the taxi, and it's like it goes from night to day. So you're right, it is hours away.
Yeah.
Ooh,
so it's the brother who attacks her and is kind of stunned and stumbling around while the suit is kind of glitching and everything. And I guess that makes more sense again in that he was this slightly weaker, less in control guy than the older brother.
Right. And the older brother is all about psychology and like
kind of
psychological torture and making her gaslighting, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah,
he kind of didn't get his hands dirty.
I'd not thought of that, but good point.
Yeah, it's and so I suppose that justifies the presence of the brother in some ways, even though his character still doesn't quite make sense throughout. But I loved that sequence.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
And then obviously it kept going and kept going and kept going. And we talked about it already, but what did you think about the way the film then actually ends with her killing him, kind of doing it off camera or whatever it is she does? She steals the suit, etc.
I mean, it was satisfying.
Yes.
But it was nonsense.
Yes.
And I mean that affectionately. Like, I do really like the film, but it was pure wish fulfillment.
Yeah.
And yes, we want to see her get her revenge, and she is owed it. But it did feel like, that's not really how that would work.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter, actually.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes you know, like I said, I like the genre-ness of this film. I like that it embraced that, and that it feels like something that you go to the cinema to see and you come out and you go, yes. Yeah. And so even if it's like, well, I'm pretty sure that you would actually get arrested for that, and like this wouldn't be the end of that, and it wouldn't be, and like, oh, but he's not dead, and then he's found, and then your fingerprints on literally everything, and and your DNA's over every, like, but and you've made the call, but never mind. Is what I would say about
exactly. It didn't matter. By that point, I was so in it.
Yeah. I mean, I and do I wish it had ended differently? Probably not. Actually.
No, it probably kind of ended as well as it could have for her, and the fact that she used the suit that no one else believed other than her existed.
Yeah. It's this is going to sound like a weird thing to say, but it kind of felt like a gift. Yeah. It kind of felt like, look, this is nonsense. Let's all accept and agree that, this is like a story about a woman who has been coerced and bullied and abused and tortured, and has had everything taken from her and her support group taken from her, and nobody believes her, and and she has had to become incredibly strong alone. And so if the ending, which is probably not real, and let's even imagine it's just in her mind, imagine a different ending to the movie, and she's basically incarcerated, and this is her having a dream, and in her dream she puts on heels, and she makes herself beautiful, and puts on lipstick, and she wears a beautiful dress, and she walks to this beautiful house that she used to live in that is lost, and is offered all the foods that she can want, and then kills the guy who has basically ruined her life, but with style and panache, and then walks out of there in a kind of a mic drop way. We let her have that. You know, she has earned that. So whether we want to see that as the real ending, which I do see it as, I'm not saying that it's a metaphorical ending, but there is, in my mind, there is an ending where that corridor scene does not happen, and she's basically, it looks like she's killed her sister, she's in prison, and that's it. And in her mind, she is this person, and she has this strength and power, and does that, and like, we give her that.
Yeah, totally. I love that reading. That's an amazing reading of it, because it's so true. I mean, you could almost believe that, if you really wanted to look at it in that bleak way, you could think that, she maybe did actually slit her wrists in the shower, died, and everything else was that fantasy. Because, you're right. Why would she have worn high heels and makeup for that final scene in which she got her revenge? Amazing. What about the fact that this is you mentioned earlier, this is a sci-fi film, right? And obviously there are sci-fi elements to this, but also there aren't really. So we've got this whole Invisible Man suit. In the original Invisible Man from 1933, the Claude Rains one, there is a lot of explanation about a particular chemical that turns him invisible, and he got it from here, and he was able to do this experiment with this. And with this movie, obviously they remove any explanation as to how or why he has become invisible. Did you mind that?
No. And actually, I liked that. So yes, you're right, there is a sci-fi element, but like, this felt like a horror movie to me. And he could have leaned into the sci-fi, but he didn't. He leant into the horror, and actually, I like the film better for that, because it's like, some suit, whatever, but let's make it scary. Just accept it. And and like, while I really did like Upgrade had a slight feeling of a sort of a slightly long Black Mirror.
Yeah, exactly.
And I did like it, but I think Upgrade sort of had an idea, or Twilight Zone, let's say. And the first half of Upgrade was absolutely amazing, but it did become quite repetitive. Because it didn't really have a strong narrative. Whereas this has a really strong narrative and idea, and the sci-fi element wasn't really the point.
Totally.
And I'm glad they didn't spend time on that, because I don't care how it works, quite frankly.
Who cares? It's not real science anyway, so I'm quite glad they didn't try and explain it with some sort of pseudoscience. And I guess also, like you said, we're so much in her point of view and not his. She doesn't
know how it works. Exactly.
Yeah. And so we only need to know as much as she knows, basically, don't we? Which is great. I'm really glad that it didn't spend the time on bothering to explain any of that. When she first goes down in the beginning to that kind of lab under the ground where there's all those different cabinets and different things, I thought, we're going to end up spending much more time with the sciencey stuff, but not at all. No. So it was, I liked that as well. Didn't need it. There was so much other stuff clearly going on, character stuff, that Leigh Whannell was obviously more interested in. I think. Do you think there'll ever be a sequel, or will this be part of a new Universal Monsters Dark Universe type attempt?
Well, that's an interesting question. I actually asked Leigh Whannell about that. And also Jason Blum. And Jason Blum was like, well, he said something along the lines of, I would never put that pressure on my filmmakers, because I already asked them to make these movies with, this small budget and these particular kind of tenets, and I would never ask if someone wanted to do it. Okay. And I asked Leigh about whether he would consider a sequel, and what he said was, he said, I don't want to jinx it, is essentially the long and short of it, but he said that he had a very good time working on it. And that if there was an appetite, he wouldn't rule it out. And Blumhouse does do sequels. I mean, look at Purge, Paranormal,
Definitely.
And I don't like, my personal honest answer is I don't know, because I kind of think that this was very good.
Yeah.
And it was a very contained story, and the whole kind of domestic abuse thing really worked.
Yeah.
But like, if she's going to go off and become an avenging angel, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think
She could be the Invisible Woman. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
like, I don't know. I mean, I would watch it because I trust those guys. I think Leigh Whannell is a good director, and I think Jason Blum is a good producer.
Yeah.
So I would still watch it, and I would have faith in them. But I'm not hanging out for a sequel.
No.
I mean, it opens it for it though.
It does open it, but also what I loved is that it also didn't feel like it was setting one up deliberately. No. It really felt like that was an end to that story.
Yeah.
And it's like you said at the very beginning, like one of Blumhouse's tenets, I guess, this idea that don't make a film with a sequel in mind, And I love that about it. And in this film, our Invisible Man is dead. That's it. So
yes, he is, and I don't think that's going to be undone.
Yeah.
And that's good, because he wasn't the character.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, which is so clever.
Yeah. Amazing. Cool. Anything else you want to mention? Anything else we haven't covered before we wrap up? How about this? Does it bother you that I didn't see the trailer till after the film, but one of the biggest jump scares is in the trailer when she pours the paint over him and he appears. And I've seen a lot of people online, and I had a lot of listener questions to ask Jason Blum, which I did ask him, why Blumhouse trailers often give away some of the main...
What did he say?
He says it's basically, he said what you can imagine, that he knows people are frustrated by it, but it's, you've got to do what you've got to do to get butts in seats, basically, and show some of the more exciting bits.
I'll tell you what I will say about that, which is not really what you asked.
Yeah, go on.
Right, the paint has the viscosity of milk, not the paint. That bothered me. Are you with me, right?
Oh, yeah, you're so right.
That's
it's very
paint.
liquidy. Yeah.
It's very liquidy.
Yeah.
What paint is that? Not enamel.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hang on. And also, why is there not more paint? And then he's washed off.
It's gone a second later.
Yeah. And it's well, where's the white spirit? What do you people use as paint? So I was honestly, genuinely, has she poured a pint of milk over him? Because it looks more like milk than it does like paint.
Yeah.
So I had a problem with that, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you for mentioning that.
There you go.
So, Jason Blum, although I think you're amazing.
Sort out your paint.
Paint viscosity.
Yeah. Your
paint viscosity.
I never thought we'd say the words paint viscosity.
Viscosity. I just didn't buy it. Even if it was, it could have been whitewash, but whitewash doesn't come in paint tins.
No.
Well, again, when did I last deal with whitewash? A long time ago.
Yeah.
But if that was Dulux, that wouldn't be like this, and then he has a quick rinse, and it's gone.
No.
That would be properly all over him, and he'd have to get white spirit.
Yeah. I did think the same thing.
Right,
I thought, how quickly was that paint just gone,
and he's just
washed
rinsed
away?
it in the sink, and there's not all marks. No, don't think so. Sorry, but that would be in your fingernails for weeks.
I love it. I love it. Well, there you go. Anyone can check out that moment in the trailer. But yeah, does it bother you when they put stuff like that in the trailer, like one of the key jump scares of the film?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
It doesn't obviously bother me as much as paint viscosity. Yes, no, I mean, this one. Less than some others, but there have been certain trailers where it's are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah,
You've
I've seen the whole film.
Ruined the entire film.
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
And I find it very annoying, and I do understand the marketing. Weirdly, I'm slightly more annoyed by, for example, do you remember the trailer for It Comes at Night?
Yes.
And I love It Comes at Night. It's a great movie, but the trailer for that made it look like a zombie movie.
I know,
and it's not at all. And that sequence is a dream sequence.
Yeah.
And it's you've massively misrepresented this, which is a genuinely excellent film.
It's a brilliant film.
And so people are really annoyed by it because they think it's going to be this thing with this black-eyed,
spewing monster thing.
And it's that's not what the film is, but the film is very good.
It's so good. Yeah, I agree. I know. It's free. I mean, I've basically, and you probably don't always get this luxury as a journalist, but I basically have stopped watching trailers for films that I know I'm going to see. So new horror films, new Blumhouse movies. I will just, for example, as we're recording this, the Candyman trailer is going to drop, I think, tomorrow. And it's going to take all of my power to resist watching it. But I'd really love to go into this Candyman film not knowing anything about it if I can get away with it. But I know not everyone has that luxury.
Sadly, I cannot get away with that.
Exactly. Awesome. Rosie, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Where can people find you on Twitter and that kind of thing?
So I'm the UK editor of Den of Geek. So you can find me at Den of Geek. On Twitter, I am at Rosie Fletcher.
Excellent.
So please come and say hi.
Yes, please do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to my guests, Rosie Fletcher, Leigh Whannell, Oliver Jackson Cohen, and Jason Blum. No biggie. So let me know what you guys think of The Invisible Man. Did you love it as much as I did, or did you think it was a little bit overrated? Please do get in touch and let me know your thoughts. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. And if you want to discuss this movie with other fellow listeners, then join the discussion group. That's called the Evolution of Horror Discussion Group, and that can be found on Facebook. If you want to support this podcast and everything we do here, you can also sign up to our Patreon, and if you donate $5 per month, you will be treated to bonus episodes every single week. Last week, we brought you an in-depth review of Bong Joon-ho's Parasite, and coming up very soon, me and Brad Hansen will be bringing you all of the horror and genre coverage from the Berlin Film Festival. So if you want to get involved, head over to patreon.com/evolution of horror and sign up now. That's it for now. Normal business on this podcast will resume. We'll be back with another occult episode very soon on the Evolution of Horror.